All right. So this morning I'm taking a short detour off of Hosea. There's two reasons for that. One, I really wanted to preach on the prodigal son, and then I saw that I had last year, so I figured I'd do this year on the appointed text. And this gives me an opportunity to speak also about the prodigal son. Also, on last Wednesday, I got long-winded. We found a bunch of bunny trails, and so I only got halfway through the material. And so I figured we would have our own bunny trail today. I can catch up at McGregor, and then we can continue with chapters 4 through whatever on the, I think it's the 11th. Yep. So next week is the 4th. So it's the 4th, and I'm out of town anyway. And so the 11th will resume. But Luke chapter 15, and I won't read all of it, but just to refresh our memories, the chapter begins. Now the tax collectors and sinners were drawing near to hear him, to hear Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." In this time, the people you ate with are the people you considered on your level. And so righteous people ate with other righteous people. Sinners ate with sinners. But a righteous person wouldn't eat with a sinner.
But they're sinners.
Well, yes. But two things there. One, the man-made tradition that had been put around God's law, many people had been duped into thinking that they could keep it. And so they didn't think they were sinners. They thought they were righteous because they believed they were keeping the law. But also, when it says sinners and tax collectors here, it's not talking about people like you and me. It's talking about the drug dealers, the prostitutes, the murderers, the gang members, the dregs, the prostitutes of the society, the dregs, the people that you avoid at all costs. And so it's evil, dangerous people. They're the scary ones. And so they are angry because not only are these people coming to Jesus, but then he's eating with them. And because they see themselves as on the level of Jesus, he's a teacher, they're a teacher, they're both rabbis, they see this as an offense. And this is what prompts the parable. We have the parable of the lost sheep. The sheep goes missing, and the shepherd leaves the 99. He goes and seeks and finds and rescues and brings back and restores that lost sheep. The woman loses a coin. And so she looks night and day, suffering whatever it is that she suffers, and finds that coin. And with both of these, there is much rejoicing. And now, I don't know why this last parable is called the parable of the prodigal son. You've got lost sheep, lost son, or lost sheep, lost coin, prodigal son. I'm not sure why it's labeled that, and I'll kind of explain why when we get to the end. But we begin. There was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me." And he divided his property between them. Now, property rights, inheritance rights, was 2/3 to the oldest, 1/3 to the younger. And so this younger son comes to his father and essentially says, "Dad, I want you to drop dead. I want you to be dead because I want my inheritance and I want it now." It's like the J.G. Wentworth commercials. It's my money and I want it now. Now, what the father should do here is smack the son, because in that day, that's what the response would be. Whether it accords with our sensibilities today, that's what it was. And he should then tell him to get back in. You'll get yours when it's time. But that's not what the father does. He says, okay, I will give you your inheritance as if I had died. Now, the community would know this has happened. And the community would feel shame because the son acted this way. Because he's a member of that tribe, of that community, of that town. And that village will feel the impact of such a despicable thing done. And so the son can't stay there. And so he takes the property and he liquidates it. And he probably doesn't get as much for it as he should, because he has to sell fast and get out of there. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And so reckless living is where we get the name Prodigal Son. Reckless is properly translated prodigal. It's wasteful. It's like if you're injured as a child and you receive a 6-figure settlement, but you can't get it until you're 18. But the moment you're 18, you get that money and it's gone in 6 months. This is the idea. Today, you're going to buy cars. You're going to buy house. You're going to use it on things that may not be the wisest thing to use it on. Well, this is what he does. He lives lavishly. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. The indication here is when he leaves, he goes to a far country. And so for the Jewish person hearing this, they would say, okay, this young Jewish boy who has done something very foolish, very mean, and dishonoring of the fourth commandment to his father, has now left Judea, left Israel. He's in a Gentile area. And this is where he squanders all of his inheritance. And so he's built up friends, at least he thinks so. But then he runs out of money, and then all of a sudden there's a famine, and he has nowhere to turn. The only thing that he can do is go hire himself out to a pig farmer. A Jewish boy in Gentile area working for a pig farmer. That is offensive to the people hearing it. The lowest of low. And he's hungry. He's starving. He's longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. Now, what pigs eat do not provide nourishment to humans, but he wanted it just because his stomach would be full. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But I perish here with with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.'" Now, do you think this is repentance? And why or why not?
Well, he's looking out for himself, too.
Right.
So, if he's doing it, more in a need and desire rather than begging for forgiveness.
Right. So it's, well, I'm in really dire straits here. I can die or I can beg to be a slave. I think I'll go beg to be a slave.
And he must be thinking his father will let him do it.
Now there's a good point. We will get there. But at any rate, he's not looking to come back and be a part of the family. And there's good reason for that. He's cashed out his inheritance. He really doesn't have a claim anymore. He's shamed the family. He's exiled himself. He doesn't really have a claim. Just genetics. That's it. And so he's not going back looking to be forgiven, brought back into the family. He's just saying, look, yeah, I did bad things. Let me be a servant. Let me be a slave. That'll be good enough. Because you know what? I can live.
I'm hungry.
And I'm hungry. I'm hangry.
Yeah.
And so,
Granddaughter like that.
so in verse 20, and he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. What does that tell you about the father?
He's a forgiving father.
Okay.
He's merciful.
And he took it, he did it on, what's the word? I can't remember. He did it on his own. He didn't wait for his son to come to him and ask, but he approached him.
Right, yeah. So he's not like the shepherd that leaves the flock, and there's not a real direct correlation between the woman, but what there is there's always the search and the scan. There's always the hope of coming over the crest of the hill, that familiar face. And he never gives up. He's always hoping to see that son come back. And a long way off, he spots the boy before the boy spots him. And what the father does next is almost as scandalous as what the son has done. The father runs. That is not done. Running is for children. Running is for those who are not a senior part of the community. If you're running, you're a child or you're a soldier. You are not, it's not just a normal part. And that is because of the dress that you wore in that day. Running can expose you. And so you don't do that. And so not only is the father told to drop dead and does it, not only does he continue looking for the boy, he breaks custom and runs to him. Why? Because he felt compassion. And when he gets there, he embraces and kisses his son. Now, there is obviously the motive of love here. But what other motive might be there in running to and reacting this way?
Well, he's encouraging his son.
Okay.
To come back.
Okay.
And hopefully, has to be forgiven.
Think of the community.
Yeah, he's going like this.
He left in shame, and they haven't forgot. If he comes strolling in, it's likely that he's going to be shamed and run back out of town. And so the father runs to him before anyone else knows he's back. And so when he comes back into the town knows that everything has been made right. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Now, there's not an ellipsis here, but I imagine if this was a movie or a TV show, as he's taking a breath in to continue his statement, the father cuts him off. He cuts in. The father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. This is a time for rejoicing. What has the father done here?
Sounds like he's forgiven him.
He has forgiven him, but not just forgiven him. What else has he done?
Well, he's celebrating, so it's not just forgiveness, it's...
Yes, absolutely. But think of the family dynamic. What has he done?
Going back into the inheritance.
He is, well, no, he doesn't have an inheritance anymore. But he is remade part of that family.
Yeah.
So when dad dies, there's nothing coming to him. He's already wasted it. Mm-hmm. But he is a part of the family. And he is not he's not the red-headed stepchild. He is the native biological son. And bring the fattened calf and kill it. Now I'm going to look up a note here to make sure I remember something correctly. I don't want to speak incorrectly. Let's see what this says. 18, so. I'm not sure why. Okay. It doesn't tell me what I thought it was going to tell me. If my memory is correct, the fattened calf is reserved for a unique, special occasion. It's the fattened calf for when the king comes. It's the fattened calf for when the elder son is married. It is a special circumstance that this fattened calf is slaughtered and prepared. And the father deems this the time to kill the fattened calf. There is a celebration. There is a feast because this son has returned. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to celebrate. All of this happens without the older son knowing it's happened. So the boy's returned. He's been restored. And what began as a bargain has melded into true repentance and reconciliation. And there's a shindig. And it's great. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came, he drew near to the house. He heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. Now, what should be the reaction?
What should be or what?
What should be?
He should be happy.
There should be rejoicing. He should run into the banquet hall and find his brother and throw his arms around him, because as the Father has said, this son of mine who was dead is alive, who was lost is found. The message, the gospel, the good news of that servant should elicit joy and happiness. But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. Now, just like in the beginning of the parable, the father acts differently than custom dictates. Custom dictates a servant going out and saying, your father demands you come in. Custom dictates, like it or not, the son goes in. But here, the father goes once again to the son. And it says he entreated him. The father disregards the dignity of his position and condescends, humbles himself to encourage his son. But he answered his father, look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. Now the reaction is understandable. My own brother, my flesh and blood, has betrayed our family, disrespected our father, and wasted a third of the family's wealth. But do you notice the commandment that's broken here? What's the accusation? How has he wasted the property?
Prostitutes.
With prostitutes. He doesn't know that. He doesn't know how the money was wasted. He knows it was wasted. So this is a slanderous accusation. Jesus doesn't say he wasted it in sexually immoral ways. He says he wasted it in prodigal, in wasteful ways. Now, could there have been prostitutes involved? Sure. But to assume that that's how it was wasted is a slanderous accusation. That is not keeping the 8th commandment. But there's also this kind of woe is me. Look, I'm your perfect child, and you've given me nothing. How dare you? You didn't even give me a goat, and now this kid's back, and you're killing the fattened calf that's supposed to be a special occasion for this? Wasting the fattened calf for this?
Now I don't have anything.
Right. So now I can't have a fatted calf. We have to start all over. You've taken it away from me. The father says, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. Son, you have stayed, And everything here is your inheritance. It's yours to do with what you will do. If you wanted a goat, you could have had two. It's yours. But the son didn't understand the freedom that he had, the grace that he had, the mercy that his father had given him by saying, look, it's all yours anyway.
But would you think that would have to be after you're dead, though? My inheritance. I mean, he's not thinking that he's got this now. He's going to have to wait for it.
It would not. I can't assert this with certainty.
Yeah.
But when the property is divided up, the rights are probably handed over. That's a guess on my part. It may not be correct, but it would make sense to me that it has to be legally split. And so even though he doesn't have control per se, it is his. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad. For this your brother was dead and is alive, was lost and is found. He is imploring his son to have the same joy and forgiveness and reconciliation, because the brother has been wronged also, and come into the feast, to join them in the feast.
And his brother really wasn't asking for all of that when he came back. He just wanted to
Right.
be served.
Right. Which may indicate another level of jealousy on the older son's part, because now this kid that doesn't have anything is now being treated as if he does. And so there's kind of a selfishness there. So maybe that plays a part of it too. But notice that this is where the parable ends. We are not told. Jesus doesn't say whether or not the son goes into the feast or not. Let's discuss that for a little bit. The three parables, who are they directed to? Do you remember? What does it say at the beginning of the chapter?
The Pharisees.
The Pharisees. The Pharisees are grumbling, so he told them this parable. And so, again, with the sheep, the sinners and tax collectors are going to recognize that they are that sheep. The coin, they're going to recognize the coin. The prodigal son, they're going to relate because they've lived prodigal lives. And they have understood, or they do understand, the grace of God, the forgiveness of God, and how he has brought them back into his fold. But like we talked about on Sunday, the Pharisees aren't going to see themselves as the sheep and the coin, because they think they are righteous. They're going to see themselves as the shepherd and the woman, and they want no part of it. We're better than shepherds, and we're men by the grace of God.
You didn't think they were already? Didn't they think they were already 1 foot into heaven? I mean,
Right. Well, and that was the perception of everybody. If anyone's righteous, if anyone's holy, it's the scribes and Pharisees. They're the ones that really do keep the law. And so, if they're lost, but they don't know they're lost. They are the lost sheep. They are the lost coin. But in this final parable, who are the Pharisees?
And then his son that was always home.
They're the older son.
I don't know.
The Pharisees are the older son. They have stayed by the Father. So they are the faithful ones to God. They're the good Jewish boys that keep the Torah. And these sinners and tax collectors, they're these nasty prodigals that have gone away and lived awful, miserable lives. They're the ones that don't deserve to be called son. And when the Pharisees see the sinners and the tax collectors coming to Jesus, who is very obviously set up as the Father because he is God in the parable, they are indignant. One, Jesus is comparing himself and equating himself to God. And two, God is accepting these terrible people. And the Pharisees are angry. They don't deserve it. Now, let's be fair. Do they? Of course not. And neither do we. And neither do the Pharisees. The Pharisees represent the older son. And anyone who stakes their righteousness on their own works and not on God's grace is the older son. That's what it means to be a Pharisee. And the Father, Jesus, goes to the Pharisees. He goes to the self-righteous. And what's the word here? Entreats them to come in. Entreats them to recognize their own sin and iniquity. Recognize that he is a gracious and forgiving God that welcomes back the repentant. We are not told if the older son goes into the party or not. And again, I can't assert this as scriptural doctrine, but just kind of my own opinion on it, I think is left open on purpose. Because this is in the middle of Jesus' ministry. And it's to be determined if the Pharisees will enter the party or not. It's to be determined if the self-righteous person today will. Now, there is, I don't remember where this comes from, but there is a version, and it may be like a church father making his own ending to this parable. So this is not the word of Jesus. This is someone coming later on that says the way the parable ends is the older son rebels and kills his father. And kills his father.
What ending? Who said that?
I don't remember who says this. So it's not the parable. It's not Jesus.
Yeah.
But there is someone early in the church that comes up with an ending and says that the end of the parable is that the older son, the Pharisee, rises up and strikes down and kills his father. Just as they crucify Jesus. So it makes sense. That said, in the beginning of the church, many scribes and Pharisees did convert. And they were some of the first heads of synagogues. And so the reality is, some remained outside, and some, by the grace of God, enter. It's left open here, I think, because God knows, but we didn't or don't know which one would fall where. And so we lament over those who retain their self-righteousness and strike down the Father. And we rejoice for those who are lost and is found, who are dead and alive. Because let's face it, the prodigal son, again, in my opinion, is mislabeled. I don't think this is the parable of the prodigal son. I think this is the parable of the lost son. The lost son is not the prodigal. The lost son is the older son. The lost son is the Pharisee. And these parables are told to the Pharisees. These parables are a gracious act to the Pharisees in treating them to recognize that they're not the righteous people that they think they are. That they're not better than the sinners, the tax collectors, the yous, the me's. They're the same. They're just as lost.
Because he came to save all.
Because he came to save all. And just as the shepherd rejoices over the sheep, just as the woman calls her friends to celebrate over the coin, just as the village celebrates the return of the prodigal, so also does heaven rejoice as the older son joins that feast. Any questions or comments?
Just as the angels, they say rejoice when there is.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to think about. The ending, yeah, I was doing pretty well until you. I gotta rethink that all. The ending is this last part is something to think about.
I can see it happening.
Yeah.
Because I can see it's happening in our world today.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, it's outside the scope of this morning, but see how there's a transition in chapter 16. He also said to the disciples, and so it seems to be the same setting. The Pharisees are still there, and likely angry over what Jesus has just said, because they're going to understand that he's saying it against them, whether they understand what he's saying or not. But then he turns his attention to the disciples and tells the parable of the dishonest manager. Again, that's outside of our scope, but there is a turning of attention here. And also, it's a difficult parable to interpret.
I think they're a hard thing for the person of today to swallow. I think because you wouldn't expect it to go that way.
I mean, I don't think you would expect it to go that way then either.
No, that's true. That's why the people were up in arms. But the people seem to accept it, all that the Father did.
Mm-hmm.
So we too should accept.
Yeah, and that's something I didn't bring up. Those attending the party, I think, would stand in for the church. Yeah. For those that rejoice with that sinner who has repented and come. You know, whether it's the church on earth, the church in heaven, the angels, however you want to describe that, those at the party are those who rejoice along with the Father.
If they have given their forgiveness, they've given their forgiveness.
Yeah. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that, but that's a great point. The boy didn't sin only against his father. He sinned against his brother. He sinned against his community. And so, with the father receiving him back, the community sees that grace and they also forgive. And that's what enables them to rejoice at this party. If the community didn't forgive him, no one would be there.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And I actually haven't spoken on that before. So thank you for that. I'll try to remember that for next time.
Yeah, because when I read it, I thought the community was going to go against them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you would think that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've dishonored your father, you dishonored us, and now you expect us to take you back?
Mm-hmm.
Get away. Go back to your pig farmer.
Yeah.
You know?
You deserve what you got.
Yeah. And let's be frank, he does.
Yeah.
You know, we don't deserve the grace that we're given. We don't deserve we don't deserve redemption. We don't deserve forgiveness, and yet God freely gives it. Which is a call for us not to be that self-righteous older brother.
Be judgmental.
Right. Yeah. And sling all kinds of accusations that we don't know are true. And even if they were true, it is not our place to spout out.
I was just going to say, how often do we do that?
Well, there's things for all of us to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So are you still trying to wrap your head around it? Is there anything specific?
No, it all makes sense. It's just something I hadn't thought about.
So how had you always thought about it?
I always thought that the older son had a point.
Yeah, that's what I was getting. The thing you said about the older son should be the lost son.
Yeah.
And that I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. But the older son does have a point.
Yeah.
He's wrong, but he has a point.
Yeah.
This really brings it home to me because we had a member of our family that left. But he at the end came back and recognized where things had gone wrong and came back knowing that he was forgiven.
Yeah. And that's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because at the time when he left, it broke my heart because he was the one child of the family that was closest to me. There were 4 years difference, but he was number 6 and I was number 7. So he's one that I grew up mostly with because all the older ones had already gone on their way to their work and done things.
Well, if there are no other comments, we'll go ahead and close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you for being here. We'll be off next week for the 4th and resume on Tuesday the 11th.